Thank you. First of all, the irony isn't lost on me that I'm standing up here as probably the only IT professional in the room without slides, talking about digital transformation, and I'm full of paper in my hands here. So part of that is because I don't really see myself as a presenter, but I'm hoping to be able to tell you a story about digital transformation and how it works as basically a lesson in change management. Some of these themes I'm sure you've already seen through the other speeches and presentations that we've had. So I'm going to kind of share with you the past, present, and sort of what I see as the future when it comes to digital transformation as it's applied to us. So first of all, I've basically been with the agency for over 20 years now. Community living has been around for more than, or close to 70 years, I believe, 68 or thereabouts. So I've actually had the opportunity to see a lot of the change management over the last few years when it comes to digital transformation. And it's been a privilege for me to watch. It's been a privilege for me to assist. So now let's kind of picture the past. Okay, it's 2003. I've got a lot less hair. The Y2K crisis has just passed. And our planes didn't fall out of the sky or anything like that. So when I was originally hired for community living, it was to set up a case management project for them. They had a hodgepodge of Windows XP machines. They just recently rolled out the first firewalls. All right. At that point, nobody even knew what a firewall was, but we knew it was great. All right. And so they had a hodgepodge of machines. Some of their locations didn't even have computers, and yet they wanted to be able to use these systems in order to do better than what they had. Okay. So to give you a little example of what we were doing at the time, we actually had these log books. They were all lined. They all had nice numbers at the top. And they would sit there and they'd write down a paragraph about what happened with somebody that day. And then they'd highlight something that happened with a family in pink. They'd highlight something that was medical in blue. And then they do all their other highlighting throughout. And then they take that book, and after a couple of days, when it was all full, they close it, they put it in a box, and they wouldn't see it for 20 years. Can anybody relate to that? Okay. So we knew we had to do something different. And so that's when we started our first kind of segue into the digital transformation challenges. Okay. So first of all, what we had to do is we purchased a product, but then we had to actually get it working. Okay, so it's one thing sometimes if you're already presented with something you believe can work for you, and then you actually have to get all of the infrastructure and framework in place to actually make that happen. Okay, so in our case, that meant taking over 18 locations and providing internet connectivity with them, getting computers all out there so that they could actually use that internet connectivity to connect with the central system. Okay, then there was also, as was mentioned before, all of the training, all of the maintenance. Okay, so there were all of these things that we had to do. Now, before that, okay, we had something that was really cool. We had something called a sneaker net. Can anybody tell me what a sneaker net is? No, it's basically when you throw on your sneakers and you run the data down the hall or to the next location. Okay, it's still talked about today because people still do that from time to time, right? But that was our sole method of communication at the time and getting information back and forth to each other. So once we got all of these computers in place and we had the case management software all set up, then it kind of opened the doors to all sorts of new possibilities. Okay, now we have this information highway set up with all of our 18 locations and all of our staff, and now we can use things like email that weren't even considered before. Now we can do things like central file storage and backups. All right. So if you have a fire at your location, you don't have to worry about, the paper maintenance and things along those lines. Okay. But in order to do that, you had to make better use of the tools that you had. Okay. And that was identifying what was most important. So once you had the computers in place, you had to get servers, you had to offer training and support, but then you also had the maintenance. All right. There are some risks with there because then you had to look at your electricity, training, and things along those lines. Okay. So fast forward a few years, I have a little more here. And the current setup now is taking a look at those digital highway pathways and figuring what to do with them. Now, at that point, a lot of organizations would say, okay, we don't want to deal with the paperwork anymore. Let's scan everything. Okay. How many of you have boxes of documents that you've been scanning and scanning and scanning to try and to get into a digital format? And what does it create? It creates more digital mess. All right. Because what happens with that? That's what's considered unstructured data. All right. So without any purpose, all you're doing is taking those records, throwing them into another folder, and then still not doing anything with them. So we found when that happened that we ended up with all of these documents, and it was really hard to keep track of what people were keeping and why, or for how long. So at least in the boxes, you knew you had a room full of junk. But by the time you had it in the digital format, now you had all of these, hard drives and whatnot that kept growing and growing and growing with data, and you were just moving your problem from one place to another. Okay. And so there's a lot of potential there for getting things lost, privacy omissions and things along those lines, where you just end up with stuff and you don't know what to do with it. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. Okay. So the thing with computers and when it comes to digital transformation is that's the easy stuff. All right. What I call the Texas oil, the low-hanging fruit. Because anybody can sit down at a computer and start using it, and all of a sudden you're faster than the person just using pen and paper. All right. But once everybody's sitting there all using computers, you've suddenly lost your competitive advantage. And then you're figuring, okay, now what can we do with them? We're still always asked to do more with less over time. Okay. That's when you start reviewing your processes. Okay. What can we do now that we have these documents all scanned in, now that we have everything there on the computer, what can we do to reduce the need to generate that unstructured content? Okay. And that's where you start looking into databases and other things. Okay. So that's where we talked about the Texas oil is the easy stuff. Now we're the Alberta oil, the oil sands, right? Now we're doing side drilling and stuff like that, trying to figure out how we can make more efficient use of these tools that we already have at our disposal now. Because I think it's common now at this point, we're not going to get rid of technology. We're not getting rid of the computers. So what do we do with it next? Okay. Project planning is hard. It's hard work, taking a look at all of your processes. All right. And figuring out what can go. If you're new to your role, or if you've been around with an organization like ours that's been around for almost 70 years, you have no idea why they put certain processes in place, let alone whether they're even legally allowed to get rid of something. So doing that is the hard work to try and find out what you can change. Okay. So how do we do it effectively? At this point, it's not a question of whether or not we should change. It's just a matter of how much work and effort we're willing to put in to do it properly. Okay. So we did that. We did the scanning. We reviewed our retention policies. We took a look at our processes, and we took a look at areas of redundancy. And through that, we were able to actually make several changes that helped us out with digital transformation. So first of all, we enabled a timesheet system. Now with our timesheet system, we didn't actually make any procedural changes to what we were doing. We just moved it to a digital format. So what we used to do is people would pen and paper do their timesheets. They would hand it off to our payroll clerk. She would sit there and hand key everything she saw in there into another system. And then it took hours and hours and days to go through. So all we did different in this case is we made the staff go into a website and punch in their hours. The managers can take a look at that and compare it. They were still using pen and paper schedules, so there's nothing different there. But they were looking at the schedule, said, yep, that matches, approve it, and it's done. It saved hours of time and days of processing time in between with all the paperwork passing back and forth. Okay. And we weren't producing any new paper because we didn't have to print anything when we were done. All of this information stayed contained in the system. We tried to do something similar with scheduling. Okay. And some of the times things don't always work out the way that you hope. All right. We picked a system, we thought it was going to work for us. And in the end, the complexity that we had and the things we wanted to do did not match what we were hoping for. All right. So what ended up happening in that case is we actually, the pandemic forced us to make some changes, and we ended up dropping it and going with Microsoft Teams. They actually have an application called Shifts that's built right into it that we were already using for everything else. And it allowed us to do schedules. The big difference is when we talked about what our goals were in that particular situation, we kept saying it was to save managers time, right? We wanted to make things more efficient. We're going to save managers time. So we figured in order to do that, we had to automate things. We're going to make those schedules do their own thing. We were going to have it automatically call people in when they were sick and things along those lines. So we're going to try and automate all that. Turned out that didn't work so well, especially if you ever needed to make a change and then you had to reprogram all your rules to do it. Okay. So what we did instead to save our managers time was give them a system that was A, easy to use, and B, was flexible to the rules as they changed. So if the province rolls out any new labor rules or anything along those lines, we just have to make sure our managers know how those rules are applied, and they can continue using the same system just as flexibly. Okay. So that was one of our big changes that we did, and we ended up saving money because, again, we were already using Microsoft Teams for other applications. We developed a fixed asset tracking management system. So we were paying about $400 a year to have this major fixed asset system. And we only had probably about 100 or 200 assets in it. We were using it for depreciation calculations, but we also wanted to do it in such a way that our auditors were comfortable with seeing the information and that anybody couldn't just go in and make any changes that they wanted to. Okay, so that was just a simple access database. Something as simple as an access database. You can go in, you can make these things work for you. Okay. With InfWork, we have set up a performance evaluation system. So one of the issues that we had there was that our performance reviews were going through all sorts of different hands from one side of the agency to the other, the sneaker network. Okay. And by the time it hit all those hands, some of the people that were actually carrying it weren't even people that were supposed to be having access to that information. We're talking couriers, admin assistants, things along those lines, right? Really, your manager, employee, director, maybe HR are the only 4 people that should even have that information, let alone be able to open an envelope and see it. Okay, so what we were able to do then is use email to notify people when their role was supposed to be activated in different parts of the review system. And we now have the ability to go in and do our performance evaluations all using a system hosted by CRM developed by Invoice. From there, we're also looking at form systems as well. So we want to be able to create forms that can replace all of that pen and paper, all that unstructured data. Now, there's different ways to do it. Microsoft actually has a free form system involved, but you can only do one and done. You can send a form and then it's there and then you can't do anything with it. But most people need workflows for their forms. They need to be able to jump from one place to another. And that's where the added complexity comes in, where we need more development. So we are looking at form systems, and we're currently working with Invoice to get that running. We've been able to get a couple of initial forms set up. And again, there's always things that you see after you have it set up. So right now we're looking for auditing potential and the ability to make changes, because apparently some people, once they fill out a form, by the time the manager gets it, there may be typos and things, and it's like you still want to be able to do some things too. Okay. So basically what happens then with the unstructured information we talk about and all of our files collected in our network drives, they slowly but surely become databases. All right. Databases are like the holy grail of IT because they can keep all sorts of storage information in them, and you can use them to produce all sorts of reporting information. Okay. So you may not have one database that rules them all, so to speak. But even if you have a couple of databases that work for you, there may be ways to integrate those so that you can get that information out of them. Okay. What I found personally, anybody that's selling you a pre-done product and promises that it'll do everything, it's rarely the case. All right. Microsoft can't do everything. None of them can. All right. A lot of them will sell, say, an HR package or a payroll package or things along those lines. They do HR really well, or they do payroll really well. But then when they start selling you the little side modules, they don't necessarily do all so high. And then you end up playing catch up, right, with those formats. So sometimes it's okay to have disparate databases as long as you know how to tie them together and get the information you need from those different sources. Okay. So the risk and reward for digital transformation. So obviously, one of the big risks is efficiency. And we all talk about efficiency when we come to digital transformation. But the big question is efficiency is different for different things or for different organizations, right? So the big one for us right now is to do more with less resources. And a lot of people start on their back-end processes. One of the other organizations brought this up, I think Brian actually, about payroll. If you have payroll efficiencies, that's great, and that can help with the bottom line, but that doesn't necessarily directly help the people that you support or your customers, right? So there's different ways to approach that efficiency and see how you can actually benefit the organization. And sometimes it comes from looking at your back-end processes as well as your front end. Okay. Some of the other benefits that come with it are increased privacy and security. Now, some of that's been brought into question recently, thanks to the cybersecurity state of things. Okay, but in general, if you set things up properly with privacy and security at the forefront when you're setting digital systems up, then it actually can do better for you, all right? Because you don't have to worry about who has access to things as long as it's locked down with a password. You're using two-factor authentication, things along those lines. Whereas if it's set up in an office, you've got your fires. How many of you keep privileged documents in a fireplace safe? A couple chuckles. How many of you know who has the key to that safe? All right. How many of you don't necessarily keep it in a safe, but keep it in an area where people are walking back and forth? Okay. So yes, cybersecurity is a thing, but there are risks to storing in other cases as well, especially with pen and paper. Okay. So for me, from an IT perspective, it took me actually a little bit to learn the difference between what privacy and security actually was, because oftentimes whenever it beeps, it's my responsibility. So when they came to me and said, okay, we need to have some privacy controls in place, how do we do that? I had to actually learn from scratch the difference between privacy and security. And for those of you that don't know the difference, privacy is basically how you assess the information that people store on you, okay? So it's about an individual's right to know the information that you're keeping on it and what's being done with it, all right? Whereas security are the tools that you have in place in order to protect that information. And that's a big difference, right? Because now you have your privacy protocols to make sure people are aware of what information you have and what you're doing. But then you have the security side of things that is actually designed specifically to protect that information. Okay, and it's important to know the difference between the two, because you need to be able to tell people what you're doing with the information, but you also need to have some standards and controls in place to keep it safe. So the security side is what I typically focus on. It was already brought up about the two-factor authentication. You should be looking at things like encryption as well. So you wouldn't typically send something through email, for example, in clear text that had somebody's birth certificate or their driver's license or anything along those lines. You shouldn't be storing it in the open either. All right, you shouldn't be storing it in methods that other people have access to, even on your network drives. You need to make sure that kind of stuff's protected. You should have privacy policies in place, and password policies in place, to make sure that people aren't using the same password for multiple systems. One of the biggest things that I find when I do cybersecurity training for new hires is I have people raise their hand and say, how many of you use the same password for multiple websites? Anybody willing to raise their hand on that one? There you go. Now, there's actually a website out there called Have I Been Pwned? And if you go to that website and plug your username in there, your email address, you're likely to find that your email on there has probably been found in some sort of compromise. And if that's the case, then any password that's assigned to that email is likely also floating around on the dark web for the bad guys to use. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why I talk about the password policies and how important it is. Data classification, understanding the information that you have sometimes comes from proper labeling. Okay, now if you're getting into the database, it's easy to find. All right, if you're going to the HR database, you can assume that's all HR related, and that it's got potential personal information. But for anything that remains unstructured, for all those things like sitting around in your network drives, you should have clear methods of being able to identify it. So if somebody does come in and steal the information, do you know what's in your wallet? Okay, what sort of information is in there? Could you identify how many social insurance numbers are sitting around in your network drives or things along those lines? Okay, so that's the data classification side. So as we start implementing more and more of the digital transformation practices, obviously our complexity increases. So that is one of the big risks for doing all of this. So when I talk about the idea that you could get information from one database for another versus another, you will have complexities that constantly grow for that. So that it is one of the downsides of having multiple databases versus a single one. And you have to learn whether or not that risk is worth the trade-off. Okay. One of the other things that we talk about for risk side is the tech debt risk. That is implementing the wrong solution, doing it too fast, or trying to be too cheap. All right. Sometimes when we look at the efficiencies, we say we want it done, we want it now, and we don't want to pay any more than this much for it. And we end up being the farmer that buys the old tractor, hoping to till his fields better, and then spending more time on the tractor than he does the fields. Okay. So the tech debt risk is involved with properly assessing what you need and making sure that the communication channels are constantly open with you and either your developer or your vendor to make sure that what you're getting over time is still what you want to end up with. Okay, and that can help reduce that risk. It never eliminates it. You might still 3 years down the road, you might figure out, hey, this really isn't overdue. But if you don't have those conversations ongoing, then that's where you put yourself at higher risk. Okay. So as far as the future is concerned, so we've got our past, we've got our current, now we got the future. So one of the things that we've changed as we've gone is we've stopped looking at all the back-end processes, or at least slowed down on it a little bit, and now we're looking at the front end. How can we directly help or benefit the people who access our services and supports? And so in order to help assess this, I started looking at our strategic plan and started looking at ways that we could actually create planning that would help them directly with the technology that they're using. Okay, so we started something called the Enabling Technology Committee. What we did is we gathered about 15 heads together and started figuring out how we're actually going to deploy technology that will directly benefit people we support. Because when we talk about the low-hanging fruit and the Texas oil versus the Alberta oil, we get into a situation where there is actually a lot of consumer technology that's out there that can really benefit people we support and keep the cost low for the organization. So for example, one of the first things we did with the Enabling Technology Committee is we got Alexas out in every one of our locations. All of a sudden, the people we support could demand their own music. We can now start assessing their specific needs and say, okay, what other things would you like to be doing this? How about somebody that is in a wheelchair that can't reach the lights can now tell it to turn off and on? Okay. And by taking that in our residential area, we're also looking at how we can do that in the community side too. So let's see what sort of funding and how we can get these things out in the community. Because if we can reduce their reliance on the direct support role over time, then we can do more with the staffing that we have. Okay, and how much that savings comes from compared to making payroll faster or making the finance systems faster. Okay, so we're becoming more consumer centric as we go through digital transformation. And we're trying to basically tie technology into what will effectively be a product that we're selling. We're selling ourselves. Okay, we're selling our services moving forward. Okay, so it is important to make sure that IT is included in your strategic planning so that those ideas are generated. And that way you can have more heads at the table discussing these things over time and helping to implement them. One of the reasons why we went with the enabling technology committee side of things is because we're actually getting direct involvement from our staff. Okay, and so that will help with the buy-in when the staff are actually helping with the product, not just the managers and directors over time. Okay, so a little bit more about the future. Basically, disruption is accelerating. Have you noticed that? The pandemic just kind of gave us the kick in the pants, and all of a sudden we're all out there trying to be hybrid and do all these things, and we're all asked to do it fast and with on a moment's notice without even really being able to have the time to plan it out. Okay, that probably isn't about to change. Okay, so what we have to do is make sure that we're managing the change management process. We're also on the verge of two different technology revolutions. The first being quantum computing. Now that may be another 10, 15 years down the road, but the idea is that if quantum computing does what it promises to, we may be in a situation very soon where our encryption just disappears. Cryptocurrency would not be as useful. Our banks, the websites that we rely on, they're going to have to do a lot of changes between now and then in order to get things up and running properly when quantum computing does actually pick out. But the other one that's just been more recent is the natural language artificial intelligence that some of you may or may not have heard of. So I'm going to take a few seconds now to share an explanation of how AI works from the perspective of a squirrel. Okay. All right. So let's say you and your squirrel friends have a system for collecting and storing acorns. And you have found that some of your friends are better at finding acorns in certain areas of forest. You and your friends have figured out how to make the most effective use of your collective acorn gathering abilities by dividing up the tasks according to each squirrel's strengths. In a similar way, AI systems are designed to make computers better at performing tasks that would normally require human intelligence. AI systems are trained on large amounts of data, much like how you and your squirrel friends learn from experience, and then use that training to make predictions and decisions. For example, you might use AI to help you gather acorns more efficiently. The AI system would analyze data on the distribution of acorns in the forest and then predict where the best acorn gathering spots are and help you and your friends decide where to go and collect the most acorns. So simply put, AI is like having a skilled acorn gathering partner who can help you and your squirrel friends be even more efficient and successful at collecting and storing acorns. So imagine being able to provide a prompt with some basic information and having a highly intelligent assistant write a comprehensive job description, write some goals for an HR review or for a performance evaluation. Or you could ask it how to write a description on AI from the perspective of the squirrel, which it did for me in about 30 seconds. Okay, so in conclusion, the future is moving fast and continues to be what we make of it. And I think success will be determined not by leaders who understand all of the technology out there, but by those who understand their own business models, their strategy, and change management. And the technology itself will always be changing at different speeds, and digital transformation is just one step in that movement. So I'd like to thank Invorg and everybody here. Oh, sorry, any questions? Thanks. It was ChatGPT.